Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're doing well and welcome to the Home Broadcasting Channel. Today we talk about freedom of the press and media restrictions in Ethiopia, democracy's greatest test. When historians measure the greatness of a nation, they not only examine its military power, its economic growth, or the height of its skyscrapers. They ask a much simpler but more profound question. Could the people speak freely? Could journalists tell the truth without fear? Could citizens criticize their government without risking imprisonment, intimidation, or exile? These questions have become increasingly relevant in Ethiopia, one of the Africa's oldest civilizations and one of the continent's most influential nations. Ethiopia is a country of over 130 million people, dozens of ethnic communities, ancient cultures, and immense geopolitical importance. It is the diplomatic headquarters of Africa and home to the African Union. It presents itself as a rising power and a nation undergoing democratic reform. Yet, the issue of press freedom and media restrictions remains one of the country's greatest challenges. The struggle between state authority and freedom of expression in Ethiopia is not new. Different governments throughout the modern Ethiopian history have attempted to control information, often arguing that national security, unity, stability require restrictions on the press. But philosophy teaches us an uncomfortable truth. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates argued that a society that suppresses questioning destroys its own wisdom. Philosopher John Stuart Mill later warned that silencing an opinion is robbing the human race. Even if the opinion is wrong, society benefits because truth becomes stronger when challenged. A government that fears criticism often ends up fearing its own people. Throughout recent years, Ethiopia has witnessed numerous incidents involving journalists, bloggers, media houses, and ordinary citizens facing restrictions. Among the most prominent examples is the case of Ethiopian journalist and activist Eskinda Nega, who spent years in prison under anti-terrorism law for criticizing government policies and advocating for democratic reforms. His detention attracted international attention and raised concern among human rights organizations regarding the use of security legislation against dissenting voices. Another example is journalist Temesgen Desalegn, who was convicted under anti-terror laws after publishing articles critical of the government. His case became symbolic of the difficulties journalists face when reporting on sensitive political matters. The case of the collective blogging group known as the Zone 9 bloggers also drew global attention. Several members of the group were arrested and accused of terrorism-related offenses after writing about constitutional rights, governance, and democracy. The name Zone 9 itself was symbolic. Ethiopia's main prison had 8 zones, and the bloggers argue that the entire country had become the 9th prison. Several media outlets have also faced suspension, licensing challenges, and allegations of intimidation. During periods of political tension and armed conflict, authorities have occasionally imposed internet shutdowns, communication blackouts, and restriction on journalists' access to conflict zones. During the conflict in northern Ethiopia, numerous domestic and foreign journalists reported difficulties accessing information, restrictions on movement, and concerns over detention of media workers. Human rights organizations and press freedom groups documented cases of journalists being detained, questioned, or having their accreditation suspended. The consequences extended beyond journalists. Ordinary citizens have increasingly found themselves under scrutiny for comment posted on social media platforms. In the digital age, a Facebook post, a tweet, or a YouTube video can become grounds for investigation, questions, or accusations of spreading false information. This creates what political philosophers call the chilling effect. The chilling effect occurs when people no longer need direct censorship to remain silent. They censor themselves. Citizens become afraid to ask questions. Journalists avoid certain stories. Academics remain silent on controversial issues. The entire intellectual life of a nation becomes constrained. And when fear becomes normal, democracy begins to weaken. The Ethiopian constitution itself recognizes this danger. The Constitution of Ethiopia guarantees freedom of expression and freedom of press. Article 29 specifically protects the rights to hold opinions without interference and to seek service and impart information and ideas through any media regardless of frontiers. These are not merely legal provisions, they are moral commitments. A constitution is a social contract between the state and its people. It represents a promise that power shall not become absolute and that citizens shall not become subjects. Philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued that governments derive legitimacy from the consents of the governed, but meaningful consent cannot exist where information is controlled and criticism is punished. How can citizens make informed decisions if journalists cannot investigate? How can elections be genuinely democratic if citizens fear expressing opinions? How can a nation correct its mistake if no one is allowed to identify them? International law is equally clear. The United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights states in Article 19 that everyone has a right to freedom of opinion and expression, including the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information through any media and regardless of frontiers. Similarly, the African Union, whose headquarters are located in Addis Ababa, has adopted the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. Article 9 guarantees the right to receive information and express opinions within the law. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, commonly known as UNESCO, has consistently emphasized that press freedom is essential to sustainable development, peace and good governance. Therefore, restrictions on journalists and media freedom are not simply domestic matters, they also affect Ethiopia's international image. To the outside world, restriction on the press often creates several perceptions. First, they create doubts about democratic commitment. Second, they raise concerns about transparency and accountability. Third, they discourage investors who depend on reliable information and predictable governance. Fourth, they attract criticism from human rights organizations and international partners. A nation seeking foreign investment and global leadership cannot afford an image of intolerance toward criticism. The irony is that governments often justify media restrictions as necessary for stability, yet historically repeatedly demonstrate the opposite. When information is suppressed, rumors flourish. When journalists are silenced, misinformation spreads. When citizens cannot speak openly, frustrations accumulate beneath the surface. Silence may create temporary order, but it rarely creates lasting peace. Open society possess a remarkable advantage: they correct themselves. Investigative journalism exposes corruption before it becomes systemic. Public criticism identifies policy failures before they become national crises. Freedom of expression functions like an early warning system for governments. A government that suppresses criticism resembles a pilot flying an aircraft after disabling all warning instruments. Eventually, danger becomes unavoidable. This is why philosophers from Aristotle to Karl Popper argue that criticism is essential for good governance. Popper specifically warned against political systems that eliminate criticism because such systems become incapable of correcting their own errors. The consequences of media restrictions are profound. Economically, innovation suffers because creativity thrives where ideas are free. Politically, public trust declines because secrecy breeds suspicion. Socially, polarization intensifies because people retreat into competing narratives and conspiracy theories. Internationally, diplomatic credibility suffers. Most importantly, future generations inherit a culture of fear instead of a culture of inquiry. The question then becomes, what should happen when leaders violate freedom of expression? The answer must always remain within the rule of law. Leaders who unlawfully suppress press freedom should face constitutional accountability, judicial review, parliamentary oversight, and where applicable, independent investigations. Courts should remain strong and independent enough to determine whether action violates constitutional protections. Parliament should exercise oversight and demand transparency. National human rights institutions should investigate abuses. International mechanisms and regional human rights bodies should document violations and encourage reforms. And ultimately, citizens themselves should use peaceful democratic means to demand accountability. The solution is not revenge. The solution is justice. Democracy survives not because leaders are perfect, but because institutions are capable of correcting leaders when they overreach. No president, prime minister, minister, or security official should stand above constitutional principles. The law must remain higher than political power. Ethiopia occupies a unique place in Africa. It is the home of the African Union and a symbol of African independence. It has survived colonial aggression, overcome famines, and navigated periods of extraordinary political transformation. Its future depends not only on economic growth or military strength, but also on whether it can create a society where ideas are free, journalists are protected, and citizens can speak without fear. Because in the end, freedom of press is not a privilege granted to journalists, it is the people's right to know. It is society's mechanism for self-correction. It is democracy's oxygen. And when the oxygen of freedom is restricted, even the strongest nations struggle to breathe. The true measure of a government is not how it treats those who praise it, but how it treats those who question it. For nations become great not by silencing criticism, but having the courage to listen to it. If you've got any question or comment, please do so in the comment section. This is the Horn Broadcasting Channel. Have a good time.